scientifically, and we find that that is the pattern. When we look at the people who want to resist the concept of transcendence, this idea that the Chinese tradition does not embrace this strict transcendence is not something that belongs to Hall and Ames. This is something that the best interpreters of the Chinese tradition have affirmed in different languages, and I'll get to that. But first, let's set the problem using Richards, I.A. Richards. Can we, in attempting to understand and translate a work which belongs to a very different tradition from our own, do more than read our own conceptions into it? Can we make it more than a mirror of our minds, or are we inevitably, in this undertaking, trying to be on both sides of the looking glass at once? To understand Mencius, for example, must we face our whole tradition of thinking and learn another, and when we have done this, if it be possible, will we be any nearer being able to translate the one set of mental operations into the other? And so he goes on, and he says, metaphysical realism has given us a certain vocabulary for understanding the Chinese tradition. Mencius gets along without any of this and with nothing at all definite to take its place. Apart entirely from the metaphysics that we are only too likely to bring in with this machinery, the practical difficulty arises that by applying it, we deform his thinking. The danger is to be guarded against is our tendency to force a structure which our special kind of Western training, idealist, realist, positivist, Marxist, makes easiest for us to work with upon modes of thinking which may very well not have any such structure at all. Now, Marcel Grenet, Chinese wisdom, has no need, the negative, has no need for the idea of God. Tang Juni, the Chinese as a people have not embraced a concept of heaven that has transcendent meaning. The pervasive idea that Chinese have with respect to Tian is that it is inseparable from the world. Tian Di He Yi, Tian Ren He Yi. Joseph Needham, Chinese ideals involve neither God nor law. Thus, the mechanical and the quantitative, the forced and the externally imposed were all absent. The notion of order excluded the notion of law, negative. Angus Graham, in the Chinese cosmos, all things are interdependent without transcendent principles by which to explain them or a transcendent origin from which they derive. A novelty in this position, which greatly impresses me, is that it exposes a preconception of Western interpreters that such concepts as Tian or Dao must have the transcendence of our own ultimate principles. It is hard for us to grasp that even the way is interdependent with man. Ren nang hong dao, fei dao hong ren. Dao, xingzhi er cheng. Ban li er dao sheng. You know, that throughout the classics, the Dao is something that is emergent, something that is under construction. Sheng sheng bu xi, that it's something that that grows in the human experience. But where I want to challenge I.A. Richards is where he says that in search of something definite, what I want to do is I want to say that there is something definite that takes the place of the kind of metaphysical realism, the vocabulary of metaphysical realism, that even after the 20th century internal critique within Western philosophy continues to be our common sense. Needham is saying here, a number of modern students, Wilhelm, Eberhard, Jablonski, and above all, Marcel Grenet, and it's really Needham who celebrates the genius of Marcel Grenet, have named the kind of thinking with which we have here to do coordinative thinking or associative thinking, or correlative thinking, or analogical thinking. I mean, there's many different ways that terms that have begun to use. This intuitive associative system has its own causality and its own logic. It is not either superstition or primitive superstition, but a characteristic thought form of its own. I want to challenge that. Like, I think that they are again, what they're doing is they're mystifying. We want to demystify. When you think of Charles Saunders Peirce and is the idea of abduction, you know, as as a way of enabling reason to create novelty, where abduction isn't reducible to either inductive or deductive, where deductive and inductive come to authorize a kind of abductive insight. Abduction belonging to the creation of theory as opposed to the justification of theory. So I mean, there's a lot of this kind of abductive, different ways of saying that within our tradition as well. And going on with Needham, the key word in Chinese thought is order, and above all, pattern. And if I may whisper it for the first time, organism. The symbolic correlations or correspondences all form part of one colossal pattern. Things behaved in particular ways, not necessarily because of prior actions or impulsions of other things, but because their position in the ever-moving cyclical universe was such that they were endowed with intrinsic natures which made their behavior inevitable for them. They were thus parts in existential dependence upon the whole world organism, and they reacted upon one another not so much by mechanical impulsion or causation as by a kind of mysterious resonance. What I want to do is I want to try to make sense of what he's saying here, to find a language to... And Grenet, again, talks about resonant pairings. Instead of observing successions of phenomena, the Chinese registered alternations of aspects. So you take something like yo and wu, you know, what is often translated as non-being and being. The idea is that this is an aspectual language, that the nature of the experience as it comes to us requires that we register both determinacy and indeterminacy in an aspectual way as opposed to an analytic way. Experience doesn't allow us to separate, this is the indeterminate and this is the determinate. We look at experience from one perspective, and it's novel, and it's progressive, and it's emergent, and it's changing, it's vital. We look at it from another perspective, and it has a formal aspect to it, it's determinate. You take something like Tiyong. That Tiyong is transformation. That the formal is part of the experience, but it's not form in the sense of ossified form. If we think of form within this processual cosmology, it's rhythm, it's cadence. The form isn't formal as opposed to a function. Function and form come together. And so to privilege either one of them is to interrupt the ongoing process of transformation. That form is within the trans. And so all of the language that we use is not dualistic, it's aspectual language. And so, Needham says the sum of wisdom consisted in adding to the number of intuitive analogical correspondences in the repertory of correlations. That wisdom expands as we're able to make increasingly more analogical assumptions. Making connections is what wisdom is all about. If you think of kenning, if you think of these different ways that we have of thinking about knowing as realizing, knowing as making a connection with something that allows us to optimize the human experience. So the role of imagination in knowing. And so again, this is, we've had enough of. And so one of the real problems that we have is the way in which we think about originative, about origination. We talk about cause and root and potential and source and nature. Let's just take one, the idea of source. Tao is source. But Tao and Wanwu are aspectual. The Tao is experiencing its continuity. Wanwu is experience in its multiplicity. It's not that Tao produces the Wanwu as something independent of it. It's not poesis. Tao and Wanwu are two ways of looking at the same phenomenon. And the creativity is not that Tao creates the Wanwu, but Tao and Wanwu are mutually creating. That's what, when Needham says it's not a creative universe, a created universe, what he's doing is he's saying that creativity lies within the relationships among the 10,000 things, among the myriad things that constitute the human experience. But then, what are those myriad things? And so we can use a term like shi as a way of getting at this alternative logic, this alternative causality. If we just take one passage from the Tao Te Ching, it says, Tao brings things to life. De provides them with nourishment. Environing things shape them, Wu, give them shape, and their contextualizing circumstances usher them to completion. Sure. Okay, so causality is not something where A causes B. Causality is the recognition that everything is necessary in order to produce any particular phenomenon. That each of us, each phenomenon, is dependent on all of the relationships that conspire to create this particular phenomenon. The difference, the starting point, Hegel's idea of starting point, the difference is beginning from the primacy of vital relationality. Starting from the primacy of vital relationality. Nothing does anything by itself. Whitehead talks about the fallacy of simple location. If we want to know this young man, what we do is we isolate him and we take him apart. And we find his soul. We find his soul, and then we know him. What Whitehead is recommending as the alternative is a narrative understanding of him. We have to know his people. We have to know his relationships. We have to know where he came from and where he's going. That knowing is a form of mapping, not some kind of analytic procedure. Whitehead also calls it misplaced concreteness, where we disrespect the transitivity of the phenomenon. The fact that he is an event. He's not a thing. He's an event that is connected with all other events, and that if we wanted to cash him out, we would have to take into account the entire cosmos. The entire cosmos, that he's holographic in the sense that by virtue of his relationality, the entire cosmos is here in this particular phenomenon. So when we talk about Zeran, Ze is not exclusive, it's inclusive. Ze is what are the qualities of his relationships that reach out to the furthest ends of an unbounded, unsummed cosmos, and how do they come together to Ran, a kind of conatus of the particular. That his Ran is resolute or disresolute by virtue of the quality of the relationships that are defining of him. So nature is not nature-nurture. Nature is not some kind of generic, reduplicative concept of what it means to be a human being. Nature is particular, and it's emergent in the sense that each member of this thing that we call humanity is in the process of transforming this provisional understanding of what it means to be a human being. And so what we find in this term sure is a different way of thinking about a thing. Remember that what we're worried about is we're worried about how things hang together in the broadest sense of things, and what it means to know our way around them. Well, what we get with this notion of sure is that it certainly has a configuration. These are all different English, sort of a non-exhaustive set of translations of this one term. So sure can be translated as leverage, differential, advantage, purchase. It could be translated as potential, momentum, timing, tendency, propensity. It can be translated as virtuosity, influence, power, force, style. It can be translated as embodiment. So what you get is a different way of thinking about a thing where certainly it has a configuration, but it is also defined by its relationships, it's also vital, existential, and it is also available for cultivation, for making it into something that is virtuosic. And so Hirschsprung gives us a language that takes us from a doctrine of external relations to a doctrine of internal relations. Autonomous subjects and objects are finally only artifacts of abstraction. What we refer to as things, whether mountains, human beings, or complex phenomena like histories, are simply the experience results of having established relatively constant horizons of value or relevance. They are not as common sense as one common sense insists. Natural occurring realities or things, indeed what we take to be objects existing independently of ourselves, are in factuality simply a function of habitual patterns of relationships. And so the cure, this amounts to an ontological gestalt shift from taking independent and dependent actors to be first-order realities and relations among them as second-order, to seeing relationality as first-order or ultimate reality, and all individual actors as conventionally abstracted or derived from them. So the idea here is that in a friendship, the friendship is what is concrete. The individuals in the friendship are abstractions from what is concrete. And